Alright, hello everybody, and welcome to another round of LSR League Racing action as I'm still getting set up the last bit of the way here. We head into round 7 after our 1 week hiatus in the middle of this season. We head to a personal favorite circuit of mine, that is Imola, here of course in Italy, a lone Italian race this season. It's definitely a personal favorite of mine. I've been lucky enough to go to this race twice, have a bunch of good memories, especially sitting down at the final 2 corners and watch a whole weekend of race action this past year. It was a great time, and it ended up being a pretty good race too, so I was very happy for that. Of course, if you are new to LSR, I'm your commentator here for route number 1, Big and Attic. If you are new, of course, welcome if you are new. And yeah, we head to what is definitely one of the shorter circuits on the calendar, but definitely a circuit that'll be sad to see go. Of course, tons of history here. Not all of it, of course, good. Of course, would be just passing the Ayrton Senna Memorial there in the run down to turns number 5 and 6 here, effectively. Of course, down in the Tosa, we're seeing a couple of cars take their first out laps with Beaton. And I believe that is one of the V-carbs. That is Tank, who is making his way out on the circuit. A tons of elevation change, very tight, very technical. Surprising, I think very surprisingly quick with how tight the circuit is. There's a ton of challenging corners. Of course, you got the run up to Variante Alta here, which will probably be the toughest circuit to get dead right. This track, it's very easy to pick up through here. But, really qualifying going to be super important here. And, of course, with it just being this lone session of qualifying, going to be important to get it right. But we'll stay on board with Tank in the V-car as he looks to get us right underway. Of course, you're going to want to stay real tight to the pit wall as you come down the pit straight here. Of course, the lone DRS zone on the circuit as you blast now down into the Tamburello chicane. Of course, going to be wanting to really attack those curves in qualifying to get all of that lap time. A lot of these setups going to be tuned to really take advantage of that. Of course, blasting down here into the Villeneuve chicane, going to be a little bit more slowed down, and that's an issue with track limits there with Tank, and we saw him just go over that line before running into Tosa. Really important to get the power down cleanly coming up the hill here as you then blast up the hill, where again, it gets pretty tight as you come up the hill into Piratella. Really want to utilize all the track on the exit, of course, blast down the hill into this double right-hander of Aqua Minerale. Again, another spot here where you might drive a little bit caught out by that traction zone on the exit, where that kind of camber changes up a lot. There's got Variante Alta here, which is definitely very challenging, definitely one of the slower portions of the circuit. And, of course, down into the final 2 Ravazza corners. Again, not a load of overtaking opportunities, but we're going to be seeing drivers try to utilize all of the time possible here in qualifying. Because Beaton is behind Tank here, trying to get a lap in, so we'll jump on board with the Aston Martin as he sets the bar. It's a 14.330, as traffic already potentially proven to be a little bit of a factor, as we'd expect that time to fall by a little bit over the course of the session. So see Beaton diving out of the way. We'll jump to a couple of other drivers, see if anybody else is on the lap. I believe that is the other V-carb of Code, or Cal, on his debut. He is invalidated as well. Lurka with a 13.882. That's a very solid lap time from him. I think stay on board with Fiat now, who seems to be improving. Spinella on lap. We'll stay on board with Crazy Riatudo here in the Williams as he comes to the end of his lap. Kaname, 14.321. So able to go just slightly faster than Beaton, but potentially picking up a little bit of traffic as well. Crazy Riatudo to the line, 15.6 flat. That's good enough for P4 for the moment. As again, just trying to get some better lap times on the board. Mango in that Red Bull looking to get underway. Fiat seems to, I think, made a mistake up there at the top of Variante Alta. Actually, he is invalidated. So that will not be an improvement. Got a number of cars making their way through the final sector. I believe they should be led by Dan here, blasting down into Ravazza number 1 and 2. This does have that bright and shiny chrome livery on as he blasts his way along the pit wall. He will go to the top, 13.807 for Dan in the McLaren. So again, a number of good lap times on the board, and a couple of drivers up there that we wouldn't normally expect to be that far up the order. We maybe expect to see B-Tom, Kaname, Mac T slots in with a 14.184. We maybe expected to see them a little bit higher, so a little bit of a surprise here in the early stages. Another one making his way now through the final two corners. He's got either Wessel or Froggy Boggy behind him. So we'll see if one or the other gets a bit of a tow. 15.6 for another one, and Froggy with a 14.951. So again, not loads of improvement there. Mango with an invalidation. Again, a number of drivers here. I just think not quite able to get laps on. We'll jump on board with BXT Burnett as he makes his way up to the top of the circuit. Actually, no, that top of the circuit, I believe, is up at Piratella, up at turn 9. So BXT plunging down here into Ravazza. Of course, down, very much downhill there. Of course, passing the fans up on the hillside. BXT Burnett, what is his team's home race, at least, will dive in the pits here and will abandon that lap. But in the early stages, it is, I think, a little bit surprisingly Dan in the McLaren up at the top. Again, how much potential traffic caused issues over the course of that one could be something to consider. As we, I believe, had 19 drivers out on circuit at one point in that opening, about 6.5 minutes there. Again, it's only, with laps being around only a minute 13, it's going to be very, very busy here in the session. You can already see a number of drivers seeing that you got an open track, trying to make their way out to get another lap in. In K7 Hitch, though, we'll just call him Hitch, making his way out. He's timed this very nicely, where he's going to have a load of clean air in front of him, where he certainly won't have to worry about traffic through the Villeneuve chicane for the first time. 23.8 through that first sector, so we'll keep that in mind as he continues to make his way through the lap. We're just going to come up the hill now into Piratella. It's very fast, only going to drop to about 5th gear, maybe a lot of drivers as well, keeping that in 6th gear. Only going to be a slight left, going to be really important to get that braking zone right through Aqua Minerale. And of course, now up into Variante Alta, 49.450. So Hitch doing well. Seemed to be a little bit maybe shaky there on the exit. As saw a whole ton of sparks fly off the back of that Haas. But into the final two corners here, going to be a big wiggle as he tries to really get that power down. And of course, going to be all over that green as he makes his way to the line. Lap time good enough for 8, so 14.890. Slots him in between Jordan and Froggy Boggy for the moment. But of course, going to be looking to continue to improve. Kaname getting underway with a lap. As again, and we now have 17 cars out on this circuit. So once again, getting very, very busy here. So we'll jump on board with Kaname, try and keep track, see if he is improving. His teammate is slightly further up the road, so we'll jump up to him in just a second here. And Kaname down by 1.5 seconds here. So Kaname certainly not improving. We'll jump to his teammate currently sitting in P2 of Lurka, who's running very solidly here in the early stages. He's up about 1.5 tenths. So the track's starting to evolve a little bit potentially as this session continues. It looks like maybe a little bit more cloud cover as well than what we started this session with. There's Lurker coming up to the Ravazza corners here. Again, going to be getting that power down. Might get a little bit of a tow as well on the far yard ahead of him. That, I believe, is Mac T. Look at the line. He lost time in that final sector, so he's going to improve, but it's still going to be about 6 thousandths back of Dan, who currently will still hold on to that provisional pole position. So a good lap there from Dan. Cross-tracker strikes has invalidated Spinella King. I believe 0.5 second I saw there as the sector 1 time. Perhaps double outlap in the cards for him. We'll jump on board with Dan here, our provisional pole sitter, as he makes his way into what is effectively turns 4 and 5, but are officially turns 5 and 6. And Dan improving by a lot, and he's going to have to improve by more as Fiat Atlas goes fastest for Williams. So again, are we looking at a potentially changed up order here? Are there going to be any potential changeable conditions in this one that we'll have to consider? I haven't seen anything from any of the drivers that would suggest that we may see rain in this one. But Dan, only up about a tenth now through the first two sectors and really chucking it there over that second curve. But how much does he have left in the tank? BXT Burnett, I believe, just jumping up there into P11 with a 14.680 solid time to try and get him further up the order. But here comes Dan through the final corner now. And can Dan do anything about Firat up on pole? He cannot. He'll improve slightly to Betch and open the gap slightly to Lurka. As Firat comes from a little bit out of nowhere there compared to some of the rest of the drivers up the top. To take a very comfortable provisional pole. As just under 0.3 of a second is that advantage. And B-Tom's going to retire from the session here. I think B-Tom and Kaname have both retired from the session. And that's because the rain is coming down. So Firat may have timed this perfectly. Just as I mentioned that the rain, it looked like it was getting cloudy, I heard nothing of any potential rain, and the raindrops will start to fall. So I think that should then, I think Firat perfectly timed that final lap, because I think that may give him provisional pole, that may give him a pole position here, as the entire grid does seem to be retiring here. We've got a number of drivers without laps on the board yet, but it doesn't look like that'll matter. As I think as the rain is apparently coming from out of nowhere, as I heard nothing that there was going to be any sort of rain. But a bit of a shock here in qualifying. As the rain coming a bit out of left field. And is going to, I think, just about put an end to qualifying. There's another one round. You can see the Haas going round as everybody on, as the couple of drivers on slicks just trying to get any sort of a lap in, trying to get any sort of a time on the board here. I imagine that, Wessel might just be trying to get a lap time on the board here, just trying to gain a couple of spots on the likes of Tank and Mango, and maybe gaining James as well. So we'll see exactly what happens here. But that should do it for qualifying. So I think we'll pretty quickly here get into the race. But yeah, Firat and Williams going to be on pole. Surprisingly, Mac T, Kaname, B-Tom, 4th, 5th, and 6th here. And so we'll see a bit of a mixed-up grid this time around. First, we'll have Mango potentially trying to make a charge from the back. Gaming James is back there. Spenny Pubstub has some solid pace. Wessel, will of course try to just gain a couple of positions here, just by trying to get to the line. As of course he makes his way around the robots. We can see the track getting very treacherous here. So Wessel will get a lap. It's going to be about a 123, a 124, actually it'll be a 121.9. So Wessel will get that lap time on the board. But that should just about take us now straight into a race session here. So once we may have a break session, of course, that might convince me to go get a little bit of a ZRS officially disabled. So track is officially in a wet state. BXT going to retire. Of course, we're just going to be waiting for the last couple of drivers to do so. There's Matt T. Of course, we're waiting on the last few. As I'm just going to message our drivers, just to remind them to retire. Just waiting on Gaming James now. But yeah, that'll do it for qualifying. So we may be sitting here for a brief moment. But, yeah, and there's the rain really coming down. So I don't know if there's race there is potential rain in the race. I'm seeing potentially that there is rain in the race. But we're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on here. So yeah, we may just be here for the next 2.5 minutes. But I think Gaming James might be asleep here. He might be having a nap. or that Mango, I am actively reading Group 1 chat. I don't think he's doing that. But who knows? Yeah, we'll end up seeing what's going on. But yeah, we'll have to see once we actually get into the race what it is. But yeah, I guess we're here for 2 minutes. I don't know. I'm about to start playing the Jeopardy theme, but I really don't want to get this stream DMCA'd. I don't know if we can exactly get that. But yeah, I suppose we're just waiting here. And yeah, I guess we're under a minute to go now in qualifying. But yeah, I think we'll take a break down to 1 minute since we've been waiting. Just being from James that we are waiting on. But yeah, the track, see, very wet here. So we'll see if that carries over into the racing conditions. I do believe, I do declare, I do believe that this should make the track fairly green as well for this race. But there is your qualifying results. It will be the Turk on pole, followed by the Bulgarian and the Ukrainian. Of course, for my purposes, there is your list. Of course, 3 drivers with no time able to get in before the rain arrived. But yeah, we'll move into the race here in just a few moments' time. And so I think, definitely going to wait to talk strategy here until we see exactly what the conditions are. Certainly could be a very, very tight one here. Of course, we will. I will go ahead and start a quick countdown here. Set it to 1:30. It is dry here and quite sunny. So we'll see exactly how this situation unfolds. But I guess something to consider here, I think one stop definitely going to be the optimal way to go. We may see a couple of drivers go to the 2 stops, specifically some of the drivers on control as tire wear could certainly be put together. But I think just overtaking is a bit too much of a challenge here. They are going to want to try to shoot for that 1 stop, shoot for that track position, try and shoot for it that way. And then we'll kind of see how that pans out from there. Of course, safety cars are a definite possibility here. of course, definitely the walls aren't super tight here compared to a lot of other circuits, compared to your Qatars, compared to, actually, Abu Dhabi's, I think, is fairly similar. But yeah, Qatar's, Paul Ricard immediately comes to mind as a circuit with just no walls. Because much like these streams, no rails. But of course, going to be figuring that out a little bit as we go. Ultimately, turn 1 and 2 going to be a bit of a challenge to see who gets through there cleanly. I think the drivers in those front 3 positions are going to be in a great spot. But of course, we'll look to ready up here in the next couple of seconds. And we'll start here in the next 30 seconds or so. So yeah, of course, just waiting to hear some of that countdown. And then we'll get right to the blast. Into Tamburello for the first time today. So see if anybody gets brave, tries to pull a Max Verstappen here at turn 1, trying to go around that outside. I imagine we're going to see everybody really defending that inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 lights. And we're underway here in Imola. Seems to be a good break pull away for the front couple of drivers. Spinella King dropping down the order very quickly, but it's a good jump from Firat in the Williams. Yellow flag behind, but we are racing. And the Williams into turn 1 cleanly. You can see a bunch of lockups behind. You can see a bunch of drivers dropping places. B-Tom dropping down the order. I think B-Tom ended up rounding into gravel. B-Tom is round and at the back of the pack here. So B-Tom getting caught out in an early incident, and these front 2 making a quick getaway. Lurker defending. There was Maxi to the inside of Kaname into Tosa now. Can he get that move done? It looks like he will. Crazy Riatudo around back at the Villeneuve chicane. Maxi, he trying to fight it back at Kaname, but Kaname getting a better exit up the hill there into Piratella, doing a great job to stay out in front. Cal up in 8th. You got a Sauber looking to defend there from NK7. Hitch trying to go around the outside. All right, as we blast up the hill, you can see already a breakaway for those front cars, heading up into Variante Alta for the first time. Of course, everybody going to slowly work their way through. Gaming James also falling well back. He's down into 20. He's back down into 20th and pretty well off the back of the field. But into lap 1 here is the Williams with the lead. Dan all over the back of them, though. Of course, don't have tires on as of yet, but Firat going to set the first fastest lap of this race. Of course, DRS now enabled, so start of lap 2 could see something. Crossfire strikes, I think, picking up some early damage there as he's had to pit. So the Sauber, the first driver into the pits so far this race, and Firat, start of lap number 2, still holds on to that lead. You can see the cars appearing there around the corner. Gaming James, 10-second for speeding in the pits, so that may be his race over as well. Lap 2 here, and again, front 2 trying to make a bit of a breakaway. Lurka about 8/10 back, lurking potentially a little bit there in the background. Just trying to stay within touching distance, within DRS range, trying to keep some of those cars from pulling away. Of course, they come through Piratella. Of course, again, dirty air, much more of a factor on this year's game. So tire management going to be very, very important here. Of course, can we see the likes of Cal potentially try and fight it back a bit later? Again, you can see the Alpines potentially struggling a bit more to compare to some of those cars in front. You can see the gap from Lurka up to Dan is increasing a little bit. We'll see if the Alpine can get close enough for DRS advantage here. I don't think he did. We'll come back out onto the pit straight here. At the pit lane entry there, it's about 4.5 tenths in it between Dan and Firat. Going to head through turn number 1, that left-handed kink. The McLaren looking to the outside. He'll sweep around the outside and take the lead here on lap number 3. As Dan takes over here in Imola. So the McLaren now trying to pull back away. Of course, Mac T still in the picture. There's Jordan with a potential move there. Froggy Boggy, I think, able to get it done. As you can see there in the background, very tight battle for the final point scoring spot between him, Spenny, and Spinala King. Mango's had a pretty good opening to this race as well, as he's all the way up into 13th. I think Dan looking to take advantage of some of that clear air now. You can see him starting to pull out that gap a little bit. Up to about half a second right now. But again, that DRS, it's a very long DRS zone here. So pretty important to get right. Again, see as another one picks up a 3-second time penalty here. As you can see the pack very, very tight. So you can see a couple of drivers have issues. Another one has gone round there. I think he went round back at Aqua Minerale there. And so that may have been a part of picking up that 3-second time penalty. We'll come across the line now to start lap number 4, and still pretty tight between these top two. I don't think Lurk was close enough to have DRS there, as that rear wing on the Alpine will not open up. So it will remain Dan and Firat battling up at the front. We'll head into Tamburello once again, and Williams actually going to back off here. As I think he looked to the inside, but really thinking better of it. Wasn't able to quite get that sweep around the outside that Dan was able to get just a lap ago, and is going to have to hold behind for the moment. Good defending there from the McLaren, but that's going to allow Lurka, Konami, MacT, BXT to all try and potentially start to reel in this fight. Of course, a lot of racing, a lot of laps left to go. Could see a lot happen. Mango, meanwhile, making some moves. He's looking to get past Spinala King as they blast up the hill on the exit of Tosa. Can they get it done into Piratella? Froggy Boggy has disconnected here. Of course, I don't think I have added. Jordan picks up a 3-second time penalty, though, as he's, I think, tucked up very tightly to the rear wing of BXT, just trying to find any sort of a way through. The top 8, meanwhile, have started to make a bit of a breakaway as Caleb, I think, starting to hold up this pack a little bit. I will try to re-invite Froggy Boggy briefly here, as I would attempt to find him. I don't see him as online. So apologies as we go ahead and start lap number 5. So I don't see him, sadly. So hopefully he does get back in before he falls too much down the order. Meanwhile, the battle for the lead remains the same. Still Dan from Firat from Lurka. But Lurka starting to close up to the back now. Firat, of course, very tight, about a quarter of a second in it between those two. Wessel now picking up a 3-second time penalty. Now it's starting to become a bit of a 5-car fight here. Again, BXT now starting to slide just that little bit more off the back of his teammate of MacT. Of course, will pick up a little bit of clean air there. Might be able to hold on to his tires a little bit better. There is Froggy Boggy able to rejoin, so good to see him back in. Of course, hopefully he is not falling too far off the back. Still in a bit of a train there for the final point-scoring position. But looking to have a decent race. Bit of a wiggle there for Dan. So it's tire wear already starting to become a little bit of a factor. Of course, the circuit going to be pretty rear limited. Going to be really important to try and keep those rear tire temperatures under control. Just because of how much traction is really required here. Of course, you got the chicanes, which aren't super big traction zones. They got Tosa, you got Piratella, which really relies on grip. Aqua Minerale then is much the same as here comes Firat. He'll try to go around the outside, much like Dan did just a couple of laps ago, and the Williams retakes the lead here on lap number 6. As these two are going to continue to go at it, and you can see Firat, I think, potentially getting a little bit trigger happy there with the throttle. Almost bled too far to the outside, but did a nice job to be able to hold on. Again, you can see Lurka just there in the background. Yellow flags. That is for a Mercedes gone round. That is for Wessel, who lost the back end. That's going to bring out a virtual safety car. As at Tamburello, Wessel in the Mercedes will lose the rear end. I think that's due to some debris being on the track. But that'll neutralize racing briefly, potentially allow some of this pack to tighten up slightly. But I think that'll give drivers a chance to potentially cool these tires down as they started to get a little bit warmer. Of course, drivers going to be really trying to manage that delta. Lurka going to be, I think, just trying to push toward the top, stick with this lead fight, especially when we get back to green flag racing. This allows a good chance real quick to go ahead and take a look at the position changes throughout this one. Mango having a great race so far as he's picked up 10 spots. BXT as well has had a very nice race himself, picking up 5. MK7 Hitch picking up 4 spots. So a number of drivers making moves, and the leader surprisingly going to dive into the pits early here. So Firat going to take an early free pit stop. Is he thinking that this VSC could make this race into a 2-stop? We will go back to green flag racing. So Firat will save a little bit of time here, but not much, As we do go back to green, and Dan with a great jump on Lurka. Firat going to come out down in, what is this, 13th, 14th, 15th. And it is a pretty long pit lane exit. He's actually going to probably come out behind Crazy Riatudo, as Wessel going to retire from the session in the pits here, as he was not able to get back around with that damage. But is that the right call from Firat to swap to hards? I think it's going to be a tall order if he thinks, potentially that they could go to the end. I think that would certainly be a challenge. Spenny and Beatom battling through Tosa. Beatom still not quite able to get that move done as they'll head up into Piratel, and Beatom, again, just not able to find quite enough pace to get him to get back next. So Dan starting to pull away a little bit. I think Kaname really trying to drop the hammer there is going to have a little bit of a stronger exit if you keep your eye on that timing tower as they head down into Ravatsa. So we should have DRS this time around. And so now we've got a bit of a new fight on our hands here, as it'll be Lurka and Dan going at it for the next couple laps. Of course, DRS going to allow the Alpine to close up very nicely. But Frozen not going to be able to continue the season, so we may see him a couple of times in a reserve role, but we won't be able to, sadly, see him week to week. Mac T, meanwhile, going to go around the outside of Kaname as we get into Tamburello. So Ferrari able to split some drivers up. Spinala King able to make a similar move as he tries to climb up the field. Mango, of course, going to be continuing to drive. Beatom will be trying to chase him down, though, from P11 as he's finally found his way past Spenny. Again, got a number of battles starting, so it's really 2v2 for any of the podium spots. Of course, Dan and Lurka battling away. Mac T and Kaname battling away. Of course, you got BXT in a nice little three-way fight with Jordan and Hitch. Of course, BXT, I think, trying to use some of that clean air to potentially try and make a bit of a breakaway. Again, I think it's going to be a tall order to try and reclose that gap. Lurka, meanwhile, I think inching closer and closer to the McLaren ahead when Crazy Rituno, though, picks up a 3-second time penalty for track limits. Firat, by the way, are back up into 15th now. So using those fresh tires to his advantage. Of course, we'll come across the line here to start lap number 9. And it's, again, a fairly comfortable gap for Dan, who has, of course, led a couple laps here. I think really going to be utilizing some of that fresh air, and it looks to be about a 4/10 advantage as of right now, potentially with just DRS alone. In here, Sirac does put up a fast lap of the race to 16.2 as he looks to jump up the order. Having a nice race here. Mac T, again, starting to draw off the front of that pack. Kaname, I think, just keeping with him. BXT, again, got to really play a lot of strategy here, as overtake's certainly hard to come by. Just got a three-way fight brewing here for P8. The Calb starting to fall off the back of Spinala King a little bit, so we'll see if this turns into a bit of a two-way fight, if Mango can manage to catch him, try and pick up some extra points. Rizzy Ritudo will dive into the pits here on lap number 9. So that will release that Williams. Again, blasting down the hill in Ravatsa once again. Again, you can see that gap just inching slightly closer. But again, it just kind of opens back up once we get to that exit. I think dirty air proving to be a bit of a factor here for Lurka. It's going to be about 8/10 immediately on the exit. The rear wing going to open as Crossfire Strikes now is the next recipient of a 3-second time penalty. We'll head down into the first couple of corners. And again, you can see about 4/10 is that difference. So you really got to be a lot closer. Kaname, meanwhile, able to get a move back done on Mac T. As the Alpine and Ferrari, they're going to have a fight here into Villeneuve. Will the Ferrari potentially try and repass here as he gets right up under that gearbox? But a bunch of nice battles going on here. Froggy Boggy, I think Froggy Boggy has made an incident as well. Has made a mistake here. Has managed to, I think, just about hold on to that car. And I think that's where you're starting to see some of that rear tire management starting to come into effect. Or, the necessity for rear tire management, rather. It's a bunch of drivers, I think, just starting to have these, little issues here and there. We've just seen both Mercedes go off there at Tamburello. Of course, they were kind of right in the thick of the pack here. So will we see anybody else potentially fall victim? As we are pretty quickly here. As we, again, should be pretty quickly here, approaching the first green flag stop of this race. We're setting that VSC, allowing drivers to again get that tire management a little bit more dialed in. Will work to their advantage. We'll have to wait and see. I'll jump back to Firat real quick. Again, having a nice recovery drive. He's already caught up with B-Tom, and he'll go to the inside here and get that move done rather comfortably. So he'll slide up into P11 for the time being, as that's a solid move on that fresh set. Again, I think the question here, though, is there another stop coming for Firat? Because, of course, he'll have to do a whole bunch of work again if he thinks that, again, this race is now a two-stop, which certainly is possible. But how much time is going to be the difference? Of course, the box from the lead of this race. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly happens. Maxi, meanwhile, I think made a bit of a mistake at some point. I think potentially got too caught up under the back of Kaname's rear wing, as Kaname has now started to pull away there in third. Firat, though, just as I was saying, he's going to have to make up a bunch of time. Now it's to make up another 3 seconds as he picks up a track limits penalty there. Will come to start at lap number 12, as again, the track limits penalties just continue to roll in as Froggy Boggy, I believe, picks up potentially another here. No, as that's his first. Yellow flag in Sector 1. That's for Gaming James, who's gone around. His hat's just not having a good day. So he's almost a lap down now. B-Tom and Mango, meanwhile, will dive into the pits here. So it's lap 12 where we see the Red Bull dive into the pits. Of course, followed by the Aston Martin. They'll have some fresh air as Spenny now, as Postman, the next recipient of a time penalty. That will, of course, allow Firat a little bit of clean air, but I think importantly, this gets B-Tom and Mango both clear air and fresh tires to potentially try and start to pull away. It's BXT now pulling the train as Spinala King has kind of caught this lead pack. Those hards, I think, very much starting to come into their own at this stage. The McLaren looking to make some moves. It's only about 4 laps away from the midway point of this race. Oh. Hey, my mouth is starting to get tired. Also, don't take that out of context, because reasons. Well, we'll start in the lap number 13 here, and again, that gap just at about a quarter of a second, and I think Lurka content here to just continue to inch away from the rest of the field. It's really going to come down to the strategy phase. Jordan 2 Wavy, though, will dive into the pits. I imagine it will be hards on the Aston Martin for the remainder of this race. As, yeah, it will be those white-rimmed softs that'll get slapped on, and he's away pretty comfortably. Let's see where he comes out in relation to his teammate and Mango. He was pretty comfortably ahead. Of course, it is quite a long time before you can shut off that pit limiter. So there goes another one, and Mango should be just rounding that corner in the background now. So here he comes, and so what is going to be the gap between Jordan and Mango as they come out? It's going to be about 1.5 seconds, 1.2. So Mango doing a very nice job getting some of that undercut to work, because he's now closing in very quickly here. Spinala King with a bit of a mistake there in the run-up to Piratella. As said, he get potentially caught up on the back of MK7 Hitcher Code, as it looks like there is damage. There's damage on the Hess. The Hess has no front wing end plate. So did Spinala King and Hitch potentially come together there in the run-up to Piratella? And how that's going to massively impact Hitch's race. Did Spinala pick up any damage as well? It doesn't appear to be that he did. Dan, meanwhile, will box from the lead, so the McLaren opts to dive into the pits here, and he's going to be followed by a number of drivers. Kaname, Mac T going to dive in. You got, I believe that's Gaming James around again, as he looks to almost go a lap down here, and he will. The Lurka will take the lead of this race. Hitch then picks up a 10-second time penalty for track limits, so passes day, going from bad to worse. So Firat now will be in the lead, as he's now running in P2 and has a pretty comfortable edge over the rest of these drivers. Of course, Dan now has stopped Jordan with a very nice race here. As he and Mango able to both get past Mac T, and I think Jordan there potentially even using the Ferrari rather. It's a bit of a defense against a charge there from Mango. As Jordan now running very solidly. He's in the DRS range of Kaname. Froggy Boggy, meanwhile, will have to defend here from Postman, from Spenny. Again, just continuing to fight here. Calvin Spinala King, again, going to be holding out for a couple more laps here. Same with Froggy Boggy, but we'll have to keep an eye on them later on into this race. Lurker, meanwhile, will take this lap to dive into the pit, so we'll stay on board with you. So we'll jump back to Dan here. As this is the battle on track right now. Game James going to retire in the pit, so that's his race over. So we'll have to see what happens here. The gap between Dan and Lurker is the one to keep an eye on. Dan, of course, going to have DRS advantage here as well on Spenny. Actually, no, he won't. I think Spenny made a mistake after that DRS detection point, so DRS will not be available, and it's going to be a pretty big gap. Dan getting a huge undercut here to the tune of almost 3 seconds over Lurker behind, as a big advantage now for Dan throughout the rest of this race, trying to work those hards to the end of this race. Fear they'll pick up another 3-second time penalty. Not what you're going to want to see if you are in that B-carb thinking a two-stop, especially trying to fight back through the field. Mango, meanwhile, was able to dispatch Jordan, as he's now able to start to potentially pull away a little bit. As will the Red Bull potentially go hunting after Kaname in this one. As Mango is definitely a driver who's had a great drive. Definitely chose just the right time to dive into the pits, make some of that undercut work, as he's now put himself in a really nice position. He's in fourth on the one-stop strategy, and as I say that, a little bit of the commentator's curse strike, and as Mango picks up that 3-second time penalty due to track limits. Again, a number of drivers continue to stay out. Again, you can see Dan starting to really utilize those fresh tires. I believe that's Tank just diving into the pits here. As Dan able to dispatch Froggy Woggy rather easily on those fresh tires with the DRS advantage, and so he'll slide up into P4. And now returning after Cove, of course, fresh air. Do him a world of good. It's yellow flag in Sector 2. I believe that's for another one with a bit of a mistake there. See Spinala King, I think, starting to struggle a little bit with those rear tires. You can see a load of wheel spin kick up there out of Tosa. Of course, again, really going to want to be attacking a lot of the curves here. That's going to definitely do a number on your tires. Of course, the end of this lap will be the halfway point of this race, so 16 more laps to go. I believe that's Crazy Riatudo who's gone round at Tamburello. I'll go ahead and recover that car, though, and we'll get back underway. It's an 11-second edge right now for Firat. Back to a number of drivers with Dan closing very rapidly. Of course, definitely want to take a look at personal strategy. Nope, I don't have the strategy thing ready there. And actually, Spinala King going to be diving in the pits here, lap 17, and Froggy will follow. So Spinala diving out of the way of his McLaren teammate, and will look to carry on now. It's going to, again, free up Dan. It's one less overtake that he has to do. Got Mac T closing in on Red Bull. Spinala King actually surprisingly going to retire from this race. So Spinala King surprisingly retiring. Did he potentially have phantom front wing damage? I don't think he had phantom front wing damage that needed to be fixed. So that's certainly odd. I don't know why Spinala King would retire from this race. I think, definitely the hard to medium not going to be the greatest way to go, especially after getting caught up in an incident like he did. But he will be a retirement from this one. So Spinala King will not finish, and McLaren's hopes now going to be with Dan, who was able to dispatch Code rather quickly there. We've got a salvo round that's Crossfire Strikes. We're just going to stay out of the way here with blue flags and let the rest of the field blast on through. But it's going to be about 15 laps to go here. 12.5 seconds is the gap. Dan can certainly go to the end. Firat, though, I think with that time penalty, I think he's certainly thinking two-stop at this phase. But Dan in a really good spot. Here comes Lorca closing in, of course. 2.7 seconds back. Left a little bit of DRS advantage. I imagine Cope not going to fight him too much here. as he looks to just try and maximize his result. Mac T, though, closing in on Mango. The Ferrari going around the outside and will get it done into Tamburello. That's a very nice move there. The Crossfire Strikes potentially... Crossfire Strikes had a puncture. So Crossfire Strikes with a puncture on 14 lap-old hards. So I think that's certainly going to be a concern for our race leader, but also for Cope, who's on a rather old set of tires. That was the reason that Sauber was moving so slowly, was he did pick up a puncture there. And that's going to bring in a safety car. We got a Mercedes rounding off the track and in the wall, I believe. As there's another virtual safety car. I believe that's from Froggy Boggy potentially doing a manual retirement, but I believe there was damage on the track. So that'll bring in a virtual safety car here, and that's perfect timing for Fiat. And this race gets completely turned on its head due to that retirement from Froggy Boggy. And that's going to completely change how the rest of this race plays out. That's a huge advantage now for Fiat. He's going to have significantly younger tires than everybody else. Of course, Cope surprisingly, oddly stays out. So I assume Cope just missed the pit lane there. Why did the V-Carb stay out is, I think, the odd question here. Mango going to dive into the pits, so he's going to go for a fresh set of tires. But a bunch of odd decisions. Of course, Fiat is going to come out there in fifth as we do go back to green flag racing here in Imola. Lap 19, and a second virtual safety car is going to really change the fabric of this race. So we'll have to see where this continues to go. As Fiat now has an opportunity to potentially charge back and steal a victory. Of course, job's not going to be easy. As I think, 5-lap tire advantage, not going to be, super significant. But I think having that time cut down, being able to come out with the bulk of a pack, really works out well for him. And could hopefully work to his strengths. It seemed to be in that straight line where Dan had a bit more of an advantage. Just able to get that overtake done, was able to use some of that straight line speed to potentially stay ahead. We saw how that worked with Lurker. We got Cope continuing to stay out here. As Kaname will get past him, but he's going to be under threat here from Fiat. Both drivers, of course, with DRS as we run down into Tamburello. The Williams looking at the inside. He's going to try to press the issue. They're going side by side here. They're going to bang wheels. Kaname into the gravel. And I think that'll certainly go a review, but if Fiat finds his way through... Is that a steward's review, though? It very well might be, and I imagine Kaname not going to be super happy with how that one went. Mango, surprisingly, going to dive into pits here and retire, so Mango, I guess, just doesn't want any points in this one. Could have at least picked up one, trying to get back into the points, but not able to do it. Mac T as well, able to get by Cole before the time we get up the hill into Piratella, and he'll get through, and that's up in P5 for the Ferrari, who's having a pretty nice showing himself. So 7.5 seconds now the difference between Fiat and Larker. Just to give you a little bit of an update as to how the penalty situation looks. It is 6 seconds for Fiat, so that's going to be a big factor in how the rest of this race pans out. That's really going to end up being more of a 13-second gap as opposed to a 7-second gap. So we'll keep that in mind as this continues. But 12 laps to go now in the remainder of this race. My voice is starting to go. Definitely very much enjoy this Imola circuit. Of course, we again saw that rain in quali really coming out of nowhere. Of course, Fiat looking to make the charge, but not gaining as much time as he might think on Lorca and Dan ahead. You could potentially see a little bit of, I don't want to call it desperation there from Fiat. I think he knows that his time in this race is limited. So he's really got to get those moves done. Cope, meanwhile, for some reason, continues to stay out. Again, just continuing to make his race worse here. Jordan, Beaton, BXC going to be all over the back of him here. Crazy Riatuda with his 10-second penalty for speeding in the pit. So that'll be his race effectively over. And you can see the Aston Martin all over the back of the V-Carbs. We head up here into Variante Alta. You can see Jordan right up the gearbox of Kobe. And into the grass. I think, again, that V-Carb really struggling. Not sure exactly what the strategy is here. Again, you can see him just having to back way off. And the Aston Martin behind him just having nowhere to go. And finally the V-Carb going to dive into the pits. And Tank's not really in it, so we can't really say it's a team play. DRS, though, for all three of these drivers, as they'll go scrambling down into Tamburello. It's too wide behind Jordan. B-Tom going to try to be braver on the brakes. It's some brilliant side-by-side action between the Aston Martins, and it's a brilliant overtake for B-Tom as he manages to find a way past his teammate. As some great racing there, and of course BXT not able to quite find any space to get a move done. But the battle now does seem to be mostly 4-6. B-Tom's had a great recovery drive here. Of course, got caught up in an incident on lap 1 that really dropped him to the back of the pack. Since then, obviously picked up 6 positions. We had another retirement in the pits as another one thinks his race is over, so he'll dive in the pits and retire. So both Red Bulls now out. Yeah, I mean, that could very well happen at Tamburello for turn 1. There was definitely, I think, about half the Porsche grid at this year's F1 weekend for Porsche Super Cup crafts there at turn 1, so that's very possible. But front battle, pretty standard. Again, kind of keep an eye on this battle for 6th. I think B-Tom's trying to bring Jordan along at this point. Just trying to really, again, just maximize points here. Excuse me. Again, B-Tom having a very nice drive here in the opening stages. Lurka, meanwhile, has started to close up a little bit on Dan out ahead of him. See that gap coming down little by little, and I think a bit of a mistake there from Dan, trying to get the power down. It's a gap now down to about 1.5 seconds. I think Lurka potentially could smell a win here. Of course, I think as well, he's going to want to try to pull away from Thierat behind him. Trying to make sure that he is as close to that 6-second mark as he can get. Again, got a couple of drivers really, really close here. So coming into Tamburello in the gap. Again, 1.5 seconds. Does Lurka have the pace in him to potentially try and make this a late race battle for the win? I think how much tire life do some of these drivers have is going to be another question. So we'll review the battle real quick. I actually need to let my throat rest a little bit. Alright, and I'm back. I had to take a, breathe there. But Thierat has closed quickly up to the back of Lurka now. No DRS this time for the Williams. But he is going to be picking up a little bit of slipstream now. Going to be 7 laps left to go next time around. So again, that number is going to be an important thing to consider, as Thierat still has to open up 6 seconds to the cars that he will be battling in just a moment's time. So that's certainly going to be a big factor. I think Dan, if you were keeping an eye on some of those gaps down through Villeneuve and into Tosa, and you can see that Dan taking up a bit more time in those straight line sections. So I think a little bit more straight line speed on that McLaren. So it could be a good sign for him trying to hold on to this victory. See on the top 3, super close here as we blast around the hills here in Emilia Romagna. I was definitely tempted to go for the full name on this YouTube live stream title. What was it? Gran Premio del Made in Italy, Emilia Romagna, or whatever it is. The super tongue twister there. Fiorot picks up another 3-second time penalty there. Just picks up a bit of wash from that rear wing of Lurkin. And despite the fact that I think he's going to get this move done rather easily, which he will around the outside, Lurkin not going to fight it. That 9 seconds of time penalty's really going to bite him here. And I think this may be part of Lurka's game plan is to try and latch on to the back of this Williams, let him battle Dan a little bit potentially, and just try to pick up some of that DRS, some of that slipstream, maybe try to make it a double, maybe try and make Dan lose 2 positions in one go. So we'll see how much strategy comes into it here. BXT burnout right on the back of Jordan. I think Tom doing a nice job just kind of having his teammate be a bit of a rear gunner here as he looks to continue to pull him along. Of course, again, time penalty there is going to be the big factor, as it is for the battle for the lead. And again, a lot could change. You could see penalties, we could see mistakes at different phases. But for Fiorot, the main goal is get that clear air and then absolutely book it, because he's got a lot of time to try and potentially open up. Of course, Lurker going to start to fall off the back of that Williams. He will have DRS here to close up, and Fiorot now going to be close enough to pick up a little bit of slipstream. Was not close enough at the DRS detection point, which is in the run down into Ravazza 2. But yeah, not quite able to get it done, but again, closing up very nicely. You can see Lurker really taking advantage of that DRS as he's closed rather quickly. And I think dirty air going to be a potentially big issue for Dan as well, as those tires are going to be slightly older than Lurka's. I can see Dan trying to do, I think, everything to potentially stay out in front, not have to battle Fiorot through any of these slower corners. So how much of game planning, how much strategy, how much you want to put into where exactly you get past? Because that's going to be a big question here for Dan in his battle with Fiorot, who's only 1.2 seconds behind your leader with everybody except Code on hards. We're actually going to go to penalties, just so that way you can see exactly where we're at as we head through Ravazza 1 and 2. 5 more times to go now that we'll head through that corner combination. And Fiorot now going to have a lot of work to do. He'll have the DRS, he'll have the slipstream, and he'll go to the inside with the tire advantage, and he'll move up into the lead. But again, that battle is going to be between Dan and Lurka now, in all likelihood, for the win. Of course, those fresher tires, does Fiorot have the time to potentially make a breakaway here? Because again, there's a lot potentially to go. We'll go ahead and stay on that leader delta for the remainder of this race, as Code picks up a 3-second time penalty there. But we'll stick to this leader delta, as that will kind of determine this final order. Very important in this one. Jordan could have another 3-second time penalty there, so he could probably not going to be at risk from the likes of Tank in terms of finishing position. But that should almost certainly ice his fate compared to BXT. Again, I think Jordan's doing a great job of being that rear gunner, allowing B-Tom to have that little bit of extra space in between him and the next closest non-teammate. We'll start lap 29 now. 4 laps to go, and Fiorot has quickly opened up a 2-second gap here. A lot more work to do, but he has done a nice job and broken DRS. Here comes Lurka, potentially. He'll go to the outside. Will he try to make a move into Tamburello? Dan keeps that nose ahead and is able to hold that lead. But again, this is going to be continuing to now work to Fiorot's advantage. And he's looking at how much that gap opens up. 2.6 seconds now. It's really, that gap needs to be at about 4.5 for Fiorot to be, or actually, it doesn't even need to be 4.5, rather, because there's 4 laps to go now. There's about 2 seconds at the start of this lap. So 7 seconds over 4 laps is the target. And as I say that, that now becomes 9 seconds over 4 laps. or over 3.5 now. That's a bit of a mistake there, I think, in the run down to Aqua Minerale. Means Firat picks up another time penalty, which could open the door for the likes of Konami even to potentially slide ahead. Though unlikely, he's in a nice battle with MacT as well, as they make their way through Aqua Minerale. We'll go to that in just a moment. We'll go to that as they run down into Tamburello on this lap, see if we see a swap of positions there for P4. But once again, we'll start lap number 30 now. Again, that gap's starting to not open up quite as much. I think Firat was trying to push super hard. May have potentially backed it off now. But Lurka going to close once again. Here comes the Alpine. Once again, going to look to the outside, and this time, he'll slide through. Lurka takes the net lead of this race into Tamburello here. and is this the potential opportunity for the Alpine to pull away? MacT, meanwhile, into Tamburello, going to do much the same. Yellow flag in Sector 3. I believe that's for Code, who made a mistake. We are at the phase of the race now, where we shouldn't see a safety car. Whoa, it's a big incident there. MacT, I think it was Jordan and B-Tom were going side by side. BXT was in the area, and that's a couple of drivers going round, so the Aston Martins have now come together. There was a piece of rear wing that flew up there. Taken now looking to potentially pick up some extra points. As a bit of chaos between the two teammates. What happened there? I have some chaos here in the final couple of laps. Again, it'll be 2 to go this time round. That should secure BXT at least an on-track finishing position of P6. The gap here at the front between Lurk and Dan is up to about a second now. Lurka trying to pull away as Dan potentially trying to hold on to a little bit of battery for a last lap charge. We'll have to wait and see, but that got closing very nicely here this lap. We'll see if that's a potential move from Dan to try to hold on to a bit of tire life. We'll jump back to this battle for P4. Here comes Konami on a charge. He'll go to the inside into Tamburello, and the Alpine retakes P4. Brilliant little pass from the Ferrari there. Going to be looking for a bit of a cutback, but not quite able to find it. And so we got 2 battles for pretty significant point-scoring positions here. That'll probably come down to the line here. And, of course, the Aston Martin's going to be going at it as well. Tankett finding his way past Hitch as this battle for the net lead into Aqua Minerale, and Dan on an absolute charge here. He was able to close it down to about half a second into Variante Alta. Of course, very important to get that right. And Dan wins wide. Dan into the gravel. That could decide this race as Dan not able to get it right, just pushing for everything. And he's fallen out of DRS range. That could just about seal the deal for Lurka to win this race. Still a lap to go, but no more DRS going to be available for the McLaren. And he's got it all to do now if he wants to potentially try and take a win. Meanwhile, back and forth, it's going to be Konami leading them down into Tamburello, into turn 2. This time round, does he have enough energy left in the tank? He's going to have to defend from DRS from MacT, who's going to be closing down to within 6/10. Of course, Ferrari going to be dumping all the battery. You can see him flying. We're looking to try and potentially be a handful in the wing mirrors of Konami, but he's not close enough to be able to quite get that done. But I imagine the Ferrari is going to be continuing to keep trying here. And toward the front, Lurka just continuing to pull away here. Firat, I think, definitely has had a commendable drive. Spenny picks up 3 seconds there. Again, a number of drivers here on a charge. Firat coming up into Variante Alta for the final time. Of course, was your pole sitter, so we'll pick up an extra point for that. I guess looking at fastest lap as well. I believe he should pick up that fast lap as well with a 2-stop. Working well for him. It's actually going to be Dan picking up the fastest lap point. Checking that very quickly. But Firat going around the final corner, and it's going to be a solid race for the Williams. Should still come home with a podium, but it'll be P3 for Firat. It will be an Alpine on the top step, but it's a new one for the season. Lurka wins in Imola after a brilliant little duel with Dan there in the final laps. Dan will come home to finish second, as that's a great point showing for McLaren and for Dan as they pick up that decent chunk there. Konami will cross the line in fourth. He'll hold off MacT. Here comes BX. We'll be waiting on BXT now to come around the final corner. Of course, got caught up and that light tangle with B-Tom and Jordan, as it looked briefly like they went 3 wide and it's Amarillo, but BXT able to come out with P6 on track. There's, of course, both Aston Martins, there's B-Tom and Jordan making their way through. Tank will end up in 8th, followed by Jordan, followed by Hitch, and then Spenny and Coe will end up outside of the points. And as they come to line, that will do it. But it is going to be Alpine once again victorious. And Lurka picking up right where Frozen left off, despite being towards the back in real life. They're towards the top in LSR Group number 1. Of course, I think it's a great win for them as well. So we'll still be celebrating up there on the podium. It is going to be the Ukrainian on top. But sadly, they don't have the track invasion like they do in real life, which is certainly a fun moment. But to the day, we'll go to Tank, surprisingly. Yeah, fast lap to Dan Lurka, your race winner. So there is your, at least provisional results. Lurka, Dan, Firat, Kaname, Maxi, BXT, B-Tom, Tank, Jordan, Hitch, Kobe, and Spenny. All your finishers in this one. So hopefully you enjoyed that one. Definitely was a pretty interesting Emilia Grand Prix. Of course, definitely be sure to tune in tomorrow for 2 more rounds of LSR F1 action. We'll also be starting up Group 4s in the near future, so if you're interested in potentially jumping on the grid and you're a bit newer to the game, definitely let us know. That group will be taking place on Fridays, so definitely stay tuned for that once that gets underway. And, of course, we also have LMU getting underway now as well. And, of course, the next round, next time you can see all these wonderful drivers in Group 1 will be next weekend at LaSalle in Qatar. So very high speed. They're technically going to be very rough on the tires. And, again, probably going to see a number of different strategies there as tire wear is going to be a huge, huge factor. But until next time, we will see you later. Have a good one.